Almost everything today involves some kind of software: driving a car, buying food, communicating, commuting, watching TV, shopping online. The list goes on. While developers are supposed to address technical questions such as functionality and project specifications, ethics are often overlooked in the development process. But we're working in a nascent profession that lacks a code of ethics, under commercial pressure, and reliant on your external clients. What's a medium-sized software agency to do? Well, to answer those questions, we're going to hear now from Rupert and Anca from the full-stack development house Lola Tech as they discuss their approach to embedding ethics in software production.
Hi, Anca.
Hi.
So we work in a busy software development agency, as we just heard. I'm going to try and frame this conversation a bit so we don't get too lost. We have loads of teams and loads of clients working on loads of projects all the time. And of course, we have our own sense of ethic. And we also have clients who have their sense of ethics, and we have to construct for each project a kind of mingled sense of what the ethical direction of a project is. That's one of the problems we have, right, is trying to conjoin those two thoughts about how things should be. We also have other problems as an agency. Lots of the theory around software development and practice is based around the activities of product-focused companies, where everyone's around building one thing at a time. But ours feels like a really dynamic landscape in comparison to that, and not all of the tools feel like they immediately fit. So there's one side of our problem. We made quite a big claim in the title, I think, when we said culture is not enough. I suppose I had in mind originally like the idea of like Google's famous line, do not be evil. But we worry, I guess, that that's not enough. Culture is an organizational quality, but in our circumstance, we need to like adjust it and tune it to particular projects. And also like culture is quite intangible. I mean, it's a great asset, but it's not very concrete. Software is concrete. So how do we embed the two together? I mean, what have I forgotten? What other problems do we face?
Well, the thing with culture is that culture varies over time periods between countries and geographic regions, among groups and also organizations. So interpretations of what is moral are influenced by cultural norms. So it is possible that what is ethical for me, and coming from an ex-communist culture, might not be ethical for you, because as we all know, there is no singular truth. So, but this is not a bad thing. So this is something that can make us more tolerant with each other. And to add to that, there are also our personal values. So employees can more easily make ethical decisions when those decisions are promoting their personal values that are in alignment with the company's values. And I also have one example for this, the whistleblowing. So in some cultures, whistleblowing is perfectly acceptable in a business environment. And in some other countries, like mine, they are not. So it's very hard to decide if for an organization that is distributed, what is ethical and what is not ethical. So when you land a job in IT, regardless of what you see displayed on the walls, what are the values that you are displaying, you come with your own baggage, with your own background, and you bring that to the table. So it's quite challenging, again, for a distributed organization to find those ethical norms so that everyone can adhere to those norms, coming, again, from different backgrounds.
I've got a feeling we're going to come back to the whistleblowing example again. I think it's going to come up. Yeah, I guess we have like a problem is when we've got our ethical values, like what do we do with them? What do we actually use them for, and how do we use them? I mean, a company like ours has like an immediate gate, like a first gate of ethics, which is about client selection. We get to choose, to an extent, who we work with. We can always say no, and it's a privilege, and one which we enjoy, right? To say, no, actually, we can't align ourselves with the goals of this particular project or the behavior of this client, and so we don't do that. But for me, like, the challenge is always, like, in the concrete case, once we're past that gate and we're working with a client, how do we, like, keep the ethical framework of a particular project concrete? The example for me, which springs to mind, is one about analytics. Like, it's a common requirement in our industry to want to, like, instrument an application so that we know what users are doing with it, ideally so that we can best serve their needs, and of course serve the needs of the business or the organization that commissions the project. It's so normal to do that sometimes it gets done almost unthinkingly. Like, there will be a requirement to instrument the project, and then we will implement that instrumentation. And there was a case in point quite recently, I think, where we realized, rather later than perhaps we should, that the kind of analytics that were being selected were at variance with the wider ethical goals of the project. But we hadn't spotted it so much because the scrutiny of that particular requirement, like, everyone had taken it as a normal thing to do. No one had really, like, considered how it fitted. So, like, for me, it's about, like, what can we do in our practice to, like, enshrine the ethical values of a project and ensure that they're constantly adhered to. I guess, like, it's like the difference with user-centered design. We've all seen the persona posters on our office walls to remind us of the needs of our users, but they're not always as concrete a reminder as we really need and that we want. So how would you, what tools do we have? What tools do we have to try and, like, keep ourselves honest about this?
When we are talking about unethical behavior, there are actually two dimensions. One of them is malicious intent. Malicious intent is quite easy to regulate. There are laws, so we are covered there. But then there is the second dimension about taking shortcuts to quality. So when it comes to taking shortcuts to quality, I believe that agile software delivery has always led with an ethical stance. So even if that approach was not driven by moral code, but by the fundamental need for the agile teams to be open and transparent, and that requires trust. So trust is the cornerstone of ethical standards and agility. And trust is what is helping you get an open and honest view of the product and the impact that your product will have on the society. So at Lola Tech, we use Scrum, and we are using Scrum not only because we can maximize value and minimize risk and waste, but because it adds the 5 values, the 5 Scrum values that actually we consider the foundation for what we define to be the ethical behavior in our company. And those 5 values are courage. So you need to be able to ask yourself, is this the right thing that I'm building here? And you need to do that constantly. And focus is another value that is helping us, instead of working in isolation from directions coming from a boss or some other person, work is visible to everyone. And ethics is a dish best served in front of people. So we go to openness. That is the third value. Respect, that is quite obvious that it's required when we are talking about ethical behavior. And commitment. So we want to be committed that we are doing what is right for the team, what is right for the product, what is right for the users.
So, forgive me, those are, I mean, I stand by those values, right? And they are, they're noble. For me, they still lack a concrete aspect in many cases. They're good to, like, measure ourselves against, but I'm still seeking, like, where can we encode the ethics of a project in a way that a team can constantly refer to it and hold itself to account? And I believe that we have like more tangible assets in the Scrum framework which help us to do that, right?
Yes, luckily we have that. One of them is the so-called definition of done. So the definition of done is what we are using with something that is defined by the team in order to prevent anyone from taking shortcuts to quality. So in the definition of done, you can include some ethical aspects. And the nice part with the definition of done is that it continues to evolve. So you stay in touch with what is happening around the world, and you keep adjusting that definition of done to your needs and to your surroundings.
So after my not quite so hypothetical example of the blithely implemented analytics package, as a team, we would go back to our definition of done and say, hey, how about we add a line here and remind ourselves that it's not done. It doesn't meet our criteria for doneness if we feel that, for example, users' information has been exfiltrated inappropriately. We could like enshrine it concretely at that point in the definition of done, and that would be a constant reminder to us. And there we get to
exactly.
Is that a proper use?
Exactly, yes. So there is a misunderstanding that the definition of done should contain only technical aspects, but that's not the case. I mean, you can include there everything that you consider required in order to deliver quality to our users.
That's cool. There's something else. There's another document. I sometimes, and I think this is going to take us back to whistleblowers in a moment, maybe, because I'm interested in talking a bit about the working agreement and how that might help us.
Yes, the working agreement is another tool that is extremely helpful to promote ethical behavior. The working agreement is something that's being formulated again by the Scrum team. It's not a one-time thing, so you create a working agreement. It's something that, same as the definition of done, evolves. But while the definition of done is focusing on the product, the working agreement is focusing on the way the team is interacting with themselves and also with the stakeholders and the users and so on.
I guess the connection to whistleblowers comes in here, doesn't it? In that the working agreement, like, both establishes a conducive environment and ensures that we can hold each other to account if people, I mean, whistleblowing is hard, right? Even, I mean, notwithstanding what you said about coming from an ex-communist country, it's hard for me as a sort of middle-class Englishman. Sometimes it feels impolite to raise an issue, right? It's a different cultural problem, I guess. And a good working agreement lets a team be very responsive to each other. It should promote quieter voices. It should ensure that people are looking around the room to see who is uncomfortable at any point in time and try and give them space to say what they need to say. So like emotional safety is part of the intention of the working agreement, right?
Exactly. And it takes time to go where you need to go. So it's not, you just don't write the working agreement and then you're there. You need to continue to learn. So, and it's, as I like to say, it's unethical to be stagnant and not be willing to learn. So it's the same with the working agreement, the same with the definition of done, and with everything that we consider or not ethical.
I think we focus quite a lot on the team, and when we're talking about our peculiar, it's not so peculiar. There are a lot of development agencies, right? But when we were talking about our peculiar circumstances earlier, I had in mind, like, there's a lot to do with the relationship with the client and the communication with them, and sometimes whistleblowing has to come out from the team and has to push back on a requirement or a stance that our client has taken. You know, we are at the service, right? But we also have a duty, and these tools help us. And I actually find it really helpful to have these things written down, which is where we concretize our culture, right? Because there's something about a document, like, you can never get around it, can you? That the document helps us push back. We can say, I'm sorry, or at least I would say I'm sorry. I say I'm sorry all the time. But we would say that we're sorry that we don't feel able to enact this particular requirement in this way because, look, see, we have these documents, we have our working agreement, or we have our definition of done, which it appears to contravene. Can we work around this again?
Yeah.
I would talk about something like the sort of collective bargaining power of a team when it's got a sort of unifying factor.
Exactly. Yes. So in product companies, it is easier to build trust between people. It's easier to be honest and transparent. But for agencies in our situation is a lot more difficult. So by using such tools, we can start the collaboration by having honest conversations with our partners, and by our collective power, we can together with the partners take the things in a certain direction, in the good direction, we like to believe.
Yeah, it takes a lot of openness and courage, I think, on both parties, right, to establish a relationship where you can have a free flow of that kind of information. I had a thought about this as well, because I know that we kind of pride ourselves on being, I think, what people call a learning organization, right? We think learning is important. We do our best to prioritize it. But very often in my world, I'm a technician, right? That learning is very focused usually on technical aspects. We learn new frameworks, we learn new languages, we learn new patterns. And it's very easy to encourage ourselves to engage in that because it's nice to kind of geek out about these details. But I think that there are other aspects which we need to learn when it comes to stuff like this, which are not so natural, particularly to technicians. I'm talking about like law and philosophy and other aspects like that, which clearly play into this discussion. How do we open our minds? I came out with an advantage. I came to software development from the humanities, right? So I'm used to thinking and arguing about those topics, but it's not always the case. Are we doing okay on that?
What do you feel about lack of accountability in this context?
In terms of learning?
Yes, in terms of learning, in terms of challenging a colleague who is not displaying an ethical behavior, because technical or not technical, we still can spot some behaviors. Why do you feel that the technical folks are not really comfortable reacting to such events?
Oh, I think it's partly about role. Like it's a view of role that says, well, this is my concern. My concern is like the correct coding of this feature, or my concern is like reliability or maintainability. I have a specialism, and other specialists within the team. Their specialism might be user interface design, or it might be facilitation in the form of in a Scrum Master role. And I think it's too easy for us to compartmentalize what our responsibilities are. And so it feels like as part of accountability, there's also like that sense of, I hope I see where you're going, about like cross-functional teams, but also like people who have cross-functional brains and don't compartmentalize so much. Is that where yes. Where you were? Yeah, it's a great thing. I guess the question is, how do we foster that? How do we help each other take on other responsibilities? There's something in Kanban about that, isn't there? Like when you're in a team and you see that there's a blockage, even when that blockage occurs outside of your normal role, then there's kind of an ethos which says that you pitch in and you add another like set of skills so that you can help out.
Yeah. Yes, there is something like that. And I was thinking about your question, what we can do to get there. I think we need to take it one step at a time. and first really accept where we are, and then try to use the tools and everything else that we have available, and try to be honest and try to understand the impact that our products are having in our society. I think we are still missing that a bit. We still believe that well, this line of code is not that important. Well, maybe this feature, well, I have some doubts, but I won't say anything. So yeah, we need to be honest and transparent with each other.
So we've got a little way. We've got a little way to go, and we've got some way down the path. We've got these areas where we think our tool set can help us concretize ethics, and we've got I don't think it's a culture scrum so much as a set of practices. It's a little more distinct, a little more rigorous, which help us hold each other and ourselves to account about that. I think I'm still in quest of something even more concrete, though. I keep wondering if it's possible to implement ethics in a software project at the unit test level. Can we, how granular can we get in terms of pushing this, the framework of ethics which a project adopts? How far into our code bases and our databases can we push that? It feels a bit intangible and again, and hard to grasp when we want to think about that. Do you have any thoughts?
I think we would be the first ones, perhaps, to try this, but it's not a bad idea. So in the end, we are discussing quality and how we define quality in our products, in our teams, in our cultures, in our organizations. So and how you measure and how you make sure that you have the highest standard of quality, then yeah, I guess it depends, but we can try it.
That feels like it feels like the conclusion we're coming to is that the trick, if there is one, is to try to bring ethics into software development as a measure of quality rather than as an externality. I guess we saw how that can go wrong a little while ago, I think, with the e-privacy directive in the UK, in the EU rather, where there was a well-intentioned piece of legislation. And I think we could talk probably another time, because I think we're getting short, about the role of legislation and how software developers can understand it. But when that legislation was enacted, the technical community's response was a rash of cookie banners, right? And the intention behind the legislation was, I think, to deter essentially the use of invasive tracking cookies. But what our response, our collective response, not everywhere, of course, generalization is foolish, but our collective response was to instead encourage users to accept the invasion of their privacy, which I guess didn't go at all as we planned, or at least as we thought we should be going. So it seems to me that if we had thought about the aspect of quality in terms of the ethics of tracking, for example, in that case, rather than the other qualities which were being traded off there about user experience or about our ability to understand what was happening with applications, or I guess our ability to sell users' data onto other organizations for various purposes, then we would have ended up in a very different place as an industry, and the web would look a lot nicer too.
Yeah. The worst part is that most of the unethical behaviors are unintentional. And if it's unintentional, it's very hard to control, to regulate, But we need to become intentional in not being unintentional. And for that, we need to learn, and we need to grow our skills, and we need to understand what this is, even if we have a technical background and we only write code. And yeah,
I can't think of a better way to wind up than that, actually. I know we're a little early, but I think you said it.